She spat in my food. So I packed her bags, set them by the door, and told her, "This house has rules, and you just broke the last one." My name is Geraldine Williams. I'm 73 years old, and I spent most of my life as a home health aide right here in Atlanta. Started back in the 70s when we still wore those crisp white uniforms and thick support hose. I've cared for so many folks I couldn't even count them if I tried. Patients with fevers, bedridden seniors, folks recovering from surgery, a little bit of everything. The doctors always respected me, even asked my opinion when a patient wasn't improving. But in my own home, I was being treated like I was nothing but a useless old woman. As if losing my Harold 5 years ago wasn't hard enough, I had to endure disrespect under my own roof. Me, who always stood my ground, who raised 3 boys on my own after my husband got sick. I was being humiliated day after day, drop by drop, like an IV slowly draining the life right out of you. Some folks think when a woman gets older, she doesn't see things, doesn't notice when they're trying to pull one over on her. They think you go blind just because your hair's gone gray. But the eyes of a woman like me see even what isn't right in front of them. We can feel it in the air when something ain't right. That's why, on that Wednesday afternoon, even though I was sitting in the living room watching my stories, I saw exactly what happened in the kitchen. I caught it in the reflection of my china cabinet glass. Sierra, my youngest son Robert's wife, thought I was distracted, but I saw when she took the ladle, filled my bowl with soup, looked around to make sure nobody was watching, and spat in my food like I was some stray dog. In that moment, I didn't say a word. I just kept watching my show like I hadn't seen a thing. But inside, something changed. You know when you've been holding so much in that eventually it overflows? That's what happened to me. What I felt wasn't anger, it was certainty. A certainty that left me strangely calm. People think the elderly are weak, that we'll accept any kind of treatment because we're afraid of being alone, that we'd rather be mistreated than have no company at all. But there are things worse than loneliness. And being disrespected in your own home, in the food you're about to eat, that's something I wasn't going to tolerate for one more day. Nobody expected what would happen next. Not Sierra, not my son, not the neighbors who always saw me as sweet Miss Geraldine. Because when a woman like me decides to act, there's no stopping her. It might take some time, but that moment will come. And when it did, even I could hardly believe what I did. Entendido. Vou reescrever o bloco 2 seguindo o briefing para o público americano, com aproximadamente 1000 palavras. I've lived in the same brick ranch house on Magnolia Street for nearly 40 years now. It's in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta, where most folks know each other by name and still bring over a casserole when someone's sick. My home isn't fancy, just a modest single story with 3 bedrooms, faded yellow paint, and a small front porch where I keep my rocking chair and a few potted geraniums that my neighbor Evelyn helps me tend to when my arthritis acts up. My husband Harold and I bought this place back in '82, when houses still cost what working folks could afford. Harold was a mechanic at the Ford plant, had the steadiest hands you ever saw, could fix just about anything with a motor. We raised our 3 boys here. Michael, the oldest, who's now over in Savannah, running his own construction business. James in the middle, always was the serious one, works for an insurance company up in Charlotte. And my youngest, Robert, who never quite found his footing in life. After Harold passed from that heart attack 5 years ago, the house felt too empty, too quiet. The walls seemed to hold echoes of a life that wasn't there anymore. I'd wake up reaching for him, only to find cold sheets next to me. I kept his clothes in the closet for nearly a year before I could bear to give them away. I'd sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the neighborhood children play, wondering how time had slipped by so fast. It was on one of those quiet evenings last year when Robert called. His voice had that familiar tension, the kind that always came before he asked for something. "Mama," he said, "Sierra and I are having some trouble with the landlord. We can't stay in our apartment anymore." Now Robert, my baby boy, has always been what my mother would call a dreamer. Never could hold down a job for more than a few months. Always had some new scheme that was going to make him rich. And Sierra, well, I'd only met her twice before they got married. Pretty girl, about 15 years younger than Robert, with those acrylic nails that clicked when she texted on her phone, which was most of the time. She had a way of looking at me like I was some relic in a museum, curious, but not particularly valuable. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Robert had never been good with money, just like his daddy. The difference was, Harold worked hard for what we had. "Just some missed payments," Robert said. "We'll figure it out, but we need a place to stay for a little while, just until we get back on our feet." A little while. That's what they all say, isn't it? But when you're 73 and living alone, the thought of having family around again doesn't sound half bad, even if it comes with complications. So I told him yes, they could come stay with me. "Just for a few months," I said, "until you find your own place." They arrived 2 days later in Robert's beat-up Chevy, with just a few suitcases and boxes. Sierra walked through my front door like she was inspecting a property she might not want to buy. She ran her fingers along the mantel, looked at the family photos without commenting, and asked if there was Wi-Fi. "I had the cable company set it up last year," I told her. "The password is taped to the refrigerator." For the first few weeks, things were calm enough. Robert would go out looking for work, or at least that's what he said he was doing. Sierra spent most of her time on the phone or watching those reality shows on TV. I tried to be a good hostess, made sure the bathroom was always clean, cooked dinner every night, and kept my opinions to myself when Sierra would sleep until noon. We settled into a routine. I'd wake up early, like I've done my whole life, make coffee, and sit on the porch watching the neighborhood come to life. Must some fourings. Patterson across the street walking his old beagle. The Wilson kids waiting for the school bus on the corner. The mail carrier, Ms. Denise, who always had time for a quick chat about her grandchildren. Then Sierra would emerge around lunchtime, pour herself some coffee, and barely acknowledge my presence. Robert would be in and out, always with some new story about a job prospect that was looking really promising. I'd nod and smile, wanting so badly to believe him. The first sign of trouble came about a month in. I noticed things weren't where I'd left them. My recipe box had been moved. The drawer where I keep important papers seemed disturbed. I told myself I was being paranoid. That old age was making me forgetful. Then small amounts of money started disappearing from my purse. Not much, $5 here, 10 there. Just enough that I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. I began counting my money each night and writing the amount down on a slip of paper I kept in my Bible, the one place I knew Sierra wouldn't look. Sure enough, the numbers didn't add up. $20 missing on Tuesday, another $15 on Friday. I confronted Robert about it one afternoon when Sierra was out. "Mama, are you sure you didn't just spend it and forget?" he asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. "You know you've been a little confused lately." "I'm old, Robert, not stupid," I said. But the look on his face, part guilt, part pity, made me wonder if maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was becoming one of those confused old ladies who can't keep track of things anymore. So I started keeping my purse in my bedroom, door locked when I wasn't there. The money stopped disappearing, but something else changed too. Sierra's attitude toward me shifted from indifference to something colder. She'd sigh loudly when I'd enter a room, roll her eyes when I'd speak, make comments under her breath that I couldn't quite hear but knew weren't kind. Tensions in the house grew thicker than Georgia humidity in August. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement had stretched to 3 months with no end in sight. Robert would disappear for hours, sometimes all day, coming home smelling of beer and making excuses about job interviews running late. Sierra spent more time on her phone, whispering and stepping outside when calls came in. And me? I tried to keep the peace, kept cooking, kept cleaning, kept pretending that this was all just fine. But inside, I was getting more and more uneasy. This was my home, the place where I'd raised my children, loved my husband, built my life. And somehow I was starting to feel like a stranger in it. I never expected what would happen next. Never imagined that in my own kitchen, in my own home, someone could show such disrespect. But that's exactly what happened on that Wednesday afternoon when I caught Sierra doing something I couldn't ignore. Something that would change everything between us. People are complicated, aren't they? Even the ones you think you know inside and out. Let me tell you about the main players in this little drama that unfolded under my roof. First, there's me, Geraldine Williams. Most folks around the neighborhood call me Miss Jerry or Miss G. I'm what you might call sturdy. Not tall, not short, just an average height black woman with silver hair I keep cut short because I don't have the patience for styling it anymore. My hands are gnarled now from arthritis, but they've always been strong. Working as a home health aide for over 40 years will do that to you. I've lifted patients twice my size, bathed them, dressed them, fed them. I've watched life come into this world, and I've held hands as it left. My face has enough lines to tell my story. Laugh lines around my eyes from raising 3 rambunctious boys, worry lines on my forehead from stretching dollars during the lean years, and a permanent crease between my eyebrows from squinting at medication labels in dim lighting. I wear simple clothes, cotton slacks, blouses with practical patterns that don't show stains, sensible shoes that don't make my bunions ache. On Sundays I still dress up for church, my good floral dress, my mother's pearl earrings, and the one pair of heels I keep polished in my closet. I'm not one for talking just to hear my own voice. Harold used to say I could say more with a look than most people could with a sermon. But I notice things. Lord, do I notice things. After decades of caring for the sick and elderly, you develop an eye for details, the slight change in someone's breathing that means pain, the way a hand trembles before a seizure, the flush in someone's cheeks that signals a fever coming on. Those same eyes have served me well in my own home. Now, my son Robert, my youngest, always was my most sensitive child, the one who'd bring home injured birds and cry when they didn't make it. He has my height, but his daddy's build. Broad shoulders, strong arms. At least they were strong before he started spending more time with video games than physical work. He's 42 now, but sometimes I look at him and still see that little boy who'd crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. He has a good heart, Robert does, but he's weak in ways that break my own heart. Robert always had big dreams, but small follow-through. Started college 3 different times. Always with a different major that was going to make him rich. Never finished. Worked a dozen different jobs. Car salesman, insurance agent, retail manager, but nothing ever stuck. He'd start strong, full of enthusiasm, then slowly that fire would dim. Something would go wrong. A boss who didn't appreciate his talent. Co-workers who were out to get him. A company that didn't recognize his potential. It was always someone else's fault when things fell apart. When he brought Sierra home and announced they were getting married after just 6 months of dating, I had my doubts. But what mother doesn't? I told myself it was good he'd found someone who made him happy. Maybe she'd be the one to help him settle down, find his purpose. Sierra Taylor Williams. That's what she insists on being called, with both names hyphenated just so. 31 years old with the kind of beauty that takes work. Perfect nails always freshly done, hair extensions that change color and length almost weekly, makeup that never seems to smudge even in Georgia humidity. She's tall and slender, dresses like she's expecting to be photographed at any moment, always has her phone in her hand, always taking pictures of her food, her outfits, herself. When she smiles at you, it never quite reaches her eyes. Those eyes, sharp, calculating. They remind me of a cat watching a bird, figuring out the perfect moment to pounce. She's not outright rude, at least not at first. No, Sierra's rudeness comes in subtle ways. The slight curl of her lip when I mention church, the way she'll check her phone while I'm mid-sentence, how she'll clean up after me in my own kitchen, rearranging things as if I didn't know where they belonged. She worked as a receptionist at a hair salon when they met. Said she was going to beauty school to become a stylist, but somehow that never happened. Since moving in, she hasn't worked at all. Says she's between opportunities and building her brand on some social media platform I've never heard of. All I know is she spends hours taking pictures of herself in different outfits, usually in my living room where the light is good. To the neighbors, Sierra is all charm. When Mrs. Patterson brings over her famous sweet potato pie, Sierra gushes over it, takes pictures, calls her Mama Patterson. Though the second Mrs. Patterson leaves, the pie goes untouched. Sierra knows exactly who to charm and who doesn't matter to her. And then there's the neighbors themselves. This street has been my home for decades, and these people are more family than neighbors. There's Evelyn Johnson next door, 78 and still working part-time as a school librarian. She brings me fresh tomatoes from her garden every summer and checks on me when it storms because she knows I get nervous. We've shared coffee and secrets on our adjoining porches for 30 years. Across the street is Mr. Patterson, Walter, who lost his wife to cancer 5 years ago, right around when I lost Harold. He walks his old beagle Buster past my house every morning at 7:15 on the dot. Sometimes we sit on the porch and talk about the old days when gas was cheap and kids played outside until the streetlights came on. Down the block is Ms. Denise, our mail carrier for the last 15 years. She knows everyone's business but keeps it to herself unless there's something you need to know. She was the one who first noticed Sierra going through my mail before I got home. "Miss Jerry," she'd said one afternoon, lingering by my mailbox longer than usual. "I delivered a letter from Social Security yesterday. Important looking. You get it?" I hadn't. When I checked the mail that day, there was nothing from Social Security. Just another thing that seemed to disappear around Sierra. The dynamics in the house shifted when Sierra moved in. Robert became someone I barely recognized, deferring to her on everything, jumping when she called, making excuses for her behavior. The son who once told me I was the strongest woman he knew now suggested I was getting confused whenever I mentioned something amiss. Sierra treated my home like a hotel, expecting meals, cleaning, laundry service, while contributing nothing. And the way she looked at me sometimes when she thought I wasn't paying attention, like I was an obstacle, something in her way. But I wasn't born yesterday. I may be old, but I wasn't about to be pushed around in my own home. Not by anyone, especially not by someone who clearly saw me as nothing but an old woman who'd outlived her usefulness. Little did she know that those same hands that had cared for the sick and dying for decades were still plenty strong enough to pack a suitcase and point to the door when the time came. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late September, the kind of day when Atlanta can't decide if it wants to be summer or fall. The air was thick with humidity, but there was a slight breeze that hinted at cooler days to come. I'd been feeling under the weather. My arthritis always acts up when the seasons start to change. So I was taking it easy, sitting in my recliner in the living room watching my stories. The Young and the Restless had been my afternoon companion for over 30 years, and I wasn't about to miss it, especially since Sierra had been hogging the TV most evenings with those reality shows she watches. The living room in my house has always been my favorite spot. The walls are a soft cream color that Harold painted himself back in '98. The furniture is well worn but clean. My floral-patterned sofa with plastic covers I put on for special occasions. My recliner that's molded perfectly to my body after years of use, and the coffee table Harold made in his workshop. What makes the room special, though, is the large china cabinet against the far wall. It was my mother's before it was mine. Solid oak with glass doors that showcase my collection of figurines and the good china we only used on holidays. That china cabinet has witnessed a lot of life in this house. Birthdays, Christmases, Sunday dinners with all my boys and their families. But on that Wednesday, it witnessed something I never thought I'd see in my own home. Something that made my blood run cold. Sierra had been in one of her moods all morning, stomping around the house, sighing dramatically, slamming doors. Robert had left early, claiming he had a job interview, though I had my doubts. That left just me and Sierra, circling each other like wary cats. Around noon, I mentioned I was feeling a bit peckish, and Sierra, in a surprising show of consideration, offered to heat up the chicken soup I'd made the day before. "I'll bring it to you, Miss Geraldine," she said, her voice sweeter than I'd heard it in weeks. You just rest your bones. I was suspicious of this sudden kindness, but my knees were aching something fierce, so I accepted the offer. Thank you, Sierra. That's mighty kind. I continued watching my show, but I could see the reflection of the kitchen in the glass doors of my china cabinet. It was like having eyes in the back of my head, something every mother learns to develop. I could see Sierra moving around in the kitchen, taking out a bowl, ladling soup from the pot on the stove. Nothing unusual. Until there was. She looked around first, checking to make sure I wasn't watching. Then, with the soup bowl on the counter, she leaned over it. I saw her gather something in her mouth, and then, "Lord have mercy," she spat. Right into my soup. Not a little accidental spray while talking, but a deliberate, hateful act. In that moment, something inside me just snapped, quietly, like a thread that's been pulled too tight for too long, finally giving way. But I didn't move, didn't gasp, didn't let on that I'd seen a thing. Sierra stirred the soup, hiding the evidence of her vile act, and brought it to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Here you go, Miss Geraldine, nice and hot. I took the bowl, my hands steady, despite the storm raging inside me. Thank you, Sierra. Would you mind grabbing me a napkin? When she went back to the kitchen, I set the bowl on the side table, making sure not to spill a drop. When she returned, I smiled and thanked her again. Then I pretended to get a call on my cell phone, a trick my grandson had taught me for getting out of uncomfortable conversations. Oh, it's Evelyn, I said, referring to my next-door neighbor. I should take this. She's been having trouble with her blood pressure medicine. I stood up, leaving the soup untouched, and walked to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. Once alone, I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking now with rage and disbelief. In all my years, through all the hardships and indignities I'd faced as a black woman in the South, I had never been treated with such contempt in my own home. By someone I'd taken in. By someone my son had chosen to marry. I didn't cry. I've never been one for tears when anger is more useful. Instead, I sat there, perfectly still, letting the reality of what had happened sink into my bones. This wasn't just about a bowl of soup. This was about respect, about dignity, about who had power in my home. Throughout my life, I'd faced plenty of challenges. I'd buried a husband, raised 3 boys on a home health aide salary, navigated a world that often didn't value women who looked like me. But through it all, I'd maintained my self-respect, and I'd earned the respect of others through hard work and dignity. What Sierra had done wasn't just disgusting, it was a declaration of war, a statement that she saw me as less than human, that she believed she could degrade me without consequences. I sat in that bedroom for nearly an hour, thinking about what to do. I could confront her immediately, but what would that accomplish? Sierra would deny it, Robert would be caught in the middle, and the tension in the house would become unbearable. No. This required something more deliberate, more calculated. This required patience. When I finally emerged from my bedroom, Sierra was on the couch, scrolling through her phone as usual. The soup bowl was gone, probably dumped in the sink or trash when I didn't eat it. Everything okay with Evelyn? She asked without looking up. Yes, just needed someone to talk her through her new medication, I lied smoothly. Thank you again for the soup. I just wasn't as hungry as I thought. For the rest of that day, I moved through the house like nothing had changed. I washed dishes, folded laundry, made dinner when Robert came home. I smiled and nodded at the right times, but inside, I was different. Inside, I was making a plan. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. Sierra and Robert had been living in my home for 3 months. That was 3 months too long. It was time for things to change, and I was going to be the one to change them. Not with screaming or fighting, that wasn't my way, but with the quiet strength that had gotten me through every other challenge in my life. Lord, I whispered in the darkness, give me the strength to do what I know I have to. and forgive me if I take a little satisfaction in it. Because one thing was certain. No one, not even my son's wife, was going to spit in my food and continue to sleep under my roof. Not while I still had breath in my body and my name on the deed to this house. That day, something inside me just snapped. Quietly, and Sierra had no idea what was coming. The morning after I caught Sierra spitting in my food, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The house was quiet. Robert had left early again, and Sierra was still sleeping as usual. I moved through my morning routine, brushed my teeth, washed my face, put on my robe. But something was different. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was watching, observing, planning. When you get to be my age, you learn that anger is a luxury you can't always afford. It burns too hot, uses up too much energy that you need for other things. What I felt wasn't just anger. It was something colder, more focused, more dangerous. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the familiar walls of the home I'd lived in for decades. This house had seen so many moments. Children's birthdays, holiday dinners, quiet evenings with Harold reading by the lamp while I worked on my crossword puzzles. This was my sanctuary, and someone had violated it. "Good morning, Miss Geraldine," Sierra said, padding into the kitchen around 11. Her hair was wrapped in a silk scarf, her face still creased from sleep. "Any coffee left?" "Fresh pot on the counter," I replied, my voice pleasant. Normal. As if I hadn't seen what I'd seen. "Help yourself." She poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. "Robert said he might be late tonight. Something about meeting a potential investor for his new business idea." I nodded, not believing a word. Robert hadn't had a new business idea in years. He was probably at a bar or at his friend Marcus's place playing those video games. But I just smiled and said, "That's nice." "I might go out too," Sierra continued, "meeting some friends for drinks." Friends. In the 3 months she'd been here, I'd never once heard her talk about any friends in Atlanta. But I just nodded again and said, "Have a good time." After she left the kitchen, I sat there thinking about respect, about boundaries, about consequences. In all my years as a home health aide, I'd cared for people at their most vulnerable, bathed them, changed them, fed them, helped them with their most private needs. And in all that time, I'd never once treated any of them with disrespect. I'd seen other aides who did, who talked down to patients, who rushed through care, who acted like the elderly were children or worse. I'd always believed that how you treat people when they're vulnerable says everything about your character. And Sierra had shown me exactly who she was. That afternoon, I walked next door to Evelyn's house. She was out in her front garden, pruning her rose bushes despite the heat. "Jerry," she called when she saw me coming up the walk. "Come sit in the shade. I've got some sweet tea." We settled on her porch, the slight breeze making the wind chimes tinkle. Evelyn had been my neighbor for 30 years, had seen my children grow up, had brought food when Harold passed. If anyone would understand, it would be her. "Something's troubling you," she said, not a question. "I can see it in your eyes." I told her everything, about Robert and Sierra moving in, about the missing money, about the way Sierra treated me in my own home, and finally, about the soup. Evelyn's face darkened with each word, her lips pressing into a thin line. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "That's assault," she finally said. "What she did, spitting in your food, that's assault. You could call the police." I shook my head. "And say what?" I saw it in a reflection, no proof, and it would tear Robert apart. "So what are you going to do?" Evelyn asked. "You can't let this continue. Next time it could be worse." "I know," I said quietly. "I've been thinking about it all night." Evelyn leaned forward. "Jerry, listen to me. That house is yours. Your name is on the deed. You worked for it, you and Harold. You have every right to decide who lives there and who doesn't." "Robert is my son," I said, my voice catching. And you raised him better than this, Evelyn countered. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions, or in this case, the consequences of the company they keep. We talked for another hour, Evelyn refilling our glasses twice. By the time I walked back to my house, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, and I had made my decision. I spent the rest of the afternoon watching Sierra. Not obviously, I wasn't going to make that mistake, but I noticed things, the way she always left her dishes in the sink for someone else to wash, how she'd turn up the TV volume when I was trying to read, the calls she'd take outside, speaking in hushed tones, the way she'd go through the mail before I got to it. Small things, but they added up to a pattern of disrespect, of contempt. That evening, while Sierra was out with her friends and Robert was who knows where, I went into their bedroom. I hadn't been in there since they moved in. I respected their privacy, even if they didn't respect mine. But tonight was different. The room was a mess, clothes strewn about, makeup scattered across the dresser I'd refinished myself years ago, fast food wrappers peeking out from under the bed. I didn't touch anything, just stood in the doorway and looked. This, too, was disrespect. Back in my own room, I sat on the edge of my bed and called Michael, my oldest son in Savannah. "Mama?" he answered, sounding surprised. I didn't call often in the evenings. "Everything okay?" "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course," he said, his voice turning serious. "Do you think I'm getting confused? Forgetful? Unable to take care of myself?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Who said that to you? Was it Robert?" "Just answer the question, Michael." "No, Mama. You're as sharp as you've always been. Why are you asking me this?" I told him not everything, but enough. About the missing money. About Robert's claims that I was getting confused. About Sierra's attitude. "You want me to come down there?" Michael asked, and I could hear the anger in his voice. "I can be there tomorrow." "No," I said firmly. "This is my house, my problem. I'll handle it." "Are you sure? Because I can—" "I'm sure," I interrupted. "But thank you for telling me the truth." After we hung up, I sat for a long while in the quiet of my bedroom. On my nightstand was a photo of Harold and me on our 40th anniversary, just a year before he passed. He was smiling that crooked smile I loved, his arm around my shoulders, holding me close. "What would you do, Harold?" I whispered to the photo. "What would you say?" But I already knew. Harold had never tolerated disrespect, especially in our home. He'd been a gentleman, but firm in his principles. "Your house is your castle," he used to say, "and you decide who crosses the drawbridge." That night, I slept better than I had in months, my decision made. The next day, I would reclaim my castle. I would lower the drawbridge for my son, but his wife, the woman who thought so little of me that she would spit in my food, she would have to find somewhere else to live. When morning came, I got up early and made my phone calls. First to my bank, where I spoke to Mr. Jenkins about securing my accounts. Then to James, my middle son, to let him know what was happening. And finally, to Ms. Denise, who wasn't just our mail carrier, but also a notary public on the side. By the time Sierra emerged from the bedroom at nearly noon, my plans were in motion. I watched her pour her coffee, check her phone, and ignore my presence, just like every other day. But this wasn't like every other day. This was the day everything would change. "Sierra," I said, my voice steady, "we need to talk." I sat down across from Sierra at the kitchen table that Wednesday afternoon. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the old clock that Harold had hung on the wall 20 years ago. It was just past 2, and through the window I could see Mrs. Patterson watering her flowers next door. Normal, everyday life going on outside while inside my house, I was preparing for battle. Sierra looked up from her phone with mild irritation. "What is it, Miss Geraldine? I was about to go out." I folded my hands on the table, the way I used to do when having serious talks with my boys when they were young. I've noticed some things around the house that concern me. She put her phone down, but kept it close. Like what? Like missing money from my purse, mail that disappears, the way you treat me in my own home. She rolled her eyes. Are we really doing this again? Robert already told you you're getting confused. You probably spent the money and forgot. That's what Robert thinks, I said calmly. But I've been keeping track, writing down exactly how much I have, and money keeps disappearing when I'm not looking. Her face changed then, just slightly. A tightening around the eyes, a quick glance toward the door. Whatever. I need to go. She started to stand. Sit down, Sierra, I said, my voice firm but quiet. We're not finished. To my surprise, she did. Maybe it was the tone of my voice, or maybe she was curious about what I might say next. Either way, she sat back down, crossing her arms over her chest. What exactly are you accusing me of, Miss Geraldine? I looked her straight in the eye. I'm not accusing you of anything yet. I'm telling you what I've observed and asking for an explanation. I don't have to explain myself to you, she snapped. This may be your house, but I'm Robert's wife. That means I have just as much right to be here as you do. That's where you're wrong, I said. This is my house. My name is on the deed. I decide who lives here and who doesn't. Her eyes narrowed. Are you threatening to kick us out? Robert would never allow it. I'm not threatening anything. I'm setting boundaries. This is my home, and I expect to be treated with respect in it. Sierra leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. And what exactly is disrespectful about the way I treat you? I cook. I clean. I help around the house. You go through my mail. You take money from my purse. You roll your eyes when I speak. And yesterday? I paused, deciding whether to reveal what I'd seen. But no, not yet. I needed to see more, understand more before I played that card. Yesterday what? She prompted. Nothing, I said, standing up. Just know that I'm watching now. Sierra laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. Watching what? You're just a confused old woman who's lonely since her husband died. You should be grateful we're here keeping you company instead of putting you in a home somewhere. The words stung, but I didn't let it show. I'd faced worse in my life than a mean-spirited young woman. My mind is perfectly clear, Sierra, and I'm not the one who should be grateful. I left her sitting there and went to my room, closing the door firmly behind me. My hands were shaking a little, but I felt stronger than I had in months. I'd drawn a line in the sand. Now I needed to see what Sierra would do next. That evening, Robert came home late, as usual. I heard him and Sierra arguing in their bedroom, their voices just low enough that I couldn't make out the words. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the neighborhood settle into night, and made a decision. The next morning, I woke early and went through my normal routine. Coffee, toast, a few pages of my devotional. But instead of staying home as I usually did, I got dressed in one of my nicer outfits and called a cab. When Sierra emerged from her room around 11, I was already gone. My first stop was the bank. Mr. Jenkins, who'd known me for years, listened with growing concern as I explained the situation. Miss Geraldine, I'm so sorry to hear this, he said, his brow furrowed. Let's take some precautions right away. We spent the next hour securing my accounts. No more withdrawals without my being present in person. A new PIN for my debit card. A credit freeze to prevent any new accounts being opened in my name. It was a lot to take in, but Mr. Jenkins was patient, explaining everything twice when needed. One more thing, I said before I left. I'd like to check if there have been any other loans or credit cards opened in my name. The search revealed nothing, thankfully, but Mr. Jenkins suggested we keep the credit freeze in place, just to be safe. I thanked him and headed to my next stop, Ms. Denise's house. As our mail carrier and a notary public, Denise knew a lot about the neighborhood. I sat at her kitchen table, sipping the sweet tea she'd offered, and told her everything, including what I'd seen Sierra do with my soup. That's disgusting, Denise said, her face contorted with anger. And illegal. That's assault, Geraldine. That's what Evelyn said too. Because it's true. Have you told Robert? I shook my head. Not yet. I need to be strategic about this. If I just accuse her, it'll be her word against mine. And Robert? I sighed. Robert hasn't been thinking clearly since he met her. Denise nodded, understanding in her eyes. Men can be like that, especially when they're already struggling. What can I do to help? I might need some papers notarized, I said. Official documents. Say no more. I'm here whenever you need me. By the time I got home that afternoon, I had a plan forming, not just for protection, but for what would come next. Because one thing was clear, Sierra could not continue to live in my house. The question was how to make her leave without losing Robert in the process. Sierra was out when I returned, and the house was blissfully quiet. I took the opportunity to do a little investigating of my own. In their bedroom, carefully so as not to disturb anything, I looked through drawers and closets. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. A small notebook wedged between Sierra's sweaters, filled with account numbers, passwords, and notes. Most of it meant nothing to me, but one page caught my eye. G's SS, first of month, $200. My Social Security check. The one that had seemed a little short lately when I checked my bank statement. She was tracking my income, planning around it. I carefully put the notebook back exactly where I'd found it and left the room, my heart pounding but my mind clearer than ever. Over the next 3 days, I observed Sierra's patterns carefully. She woke late, spent hours on her phone, left the house around 3 p.m. most days, and returned after dinner. When Robert was home, she was all sweetness and light. When it was just the two of us, the mask dropped, and I saw the contempt in her eyes. On Sunday, I invited Evelyn over for coffee after church. Sierra was still sleeping, but Robert joined us at the kitchen table, looking tired but happy to see a familiar face from his childhood. "How's the job hunt going, Robert?" Evelyn asked, stirring sugar into her coffee. Robert shifted uncomfortably. "It's going. Had a few promising leads this week." I kept my face neutral, though I knew he was lying. Evelyn, bless her, pressed on. "What kind of work are you looking for these days? Still in sales?" Actually, Sierra and I are thinking of starting our own business. Online thing, you know? Social media marketing." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? And how's that going to work? You need clients? Startup costs?" Robert's face flushed. "We're figuring it out. Sierra has connections." I sipped my coffee and watched my son squirm under Evelyn's gentle but persistent questions. By the time she left, Robert looked deflated, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and determination. My boy was lost, wrapped up in Sierra's web of lies and manipulation. But I wasn't going to let her destroy him or take advantage of me any longer. That night, I prayed longer and harder than I had in years. "Lord," I whispered into the darkness of my bedroom, "give me the strength to do what I know I have to, and forgive me if I take a little satisfaction in it." Because the next day would change everything. The next day, I would reclaim my home. The day arrived like any other. The sun peeked through my kitchen curtains, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. I'd been up since 5 a.m., old habits from decades of early mornings as a health aide. I made my coffee extra strong that morning and sat at the table in silence, watching the clock tick toward noon. I knew Sierra's patterns by now. She'd sleep until at least 11, check her phone for an hour, then spend another hour in the bathroom getting ready. Robert had spent the night at his friend Marcus's place after another argument with Sierra, which was perfect for my plan. I needed to confront her alone. Around 10 a.m., I called Evelyn next door. "Today's the day," I told her. "You sure you don't want me to come over?" she asked, concern heavy in her voice. "No, this is something I need to do myself, but maybe check in around 2?" "I'll be watching from my window," she promised. "First sign of trouble, I'm calling Walter to come over." I spent the next hour getting everything ready. I placed Sierra's suitcases, the expensive matched set she'd arrived with, by the front door. I gathered all her clothes from the laundry and folded them neatly on top. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, waiting. In my hand, I held a small piece of paper, the withdrawal slip from my bank account with Sierra's forged signature. Mr. Jenkins had gotten it for me yesterday, along with documentation of all the unauthorized withdrawals over the past 3 months. At 12:30, I heard Sierra's footsteps in the hallway, followed by the bathroom door closing. The shower ran for nearly half an hour. By the time she emerged and made her way to the kitchen, it was past 1 p.m. She walked in wearing one of her fancy outfits, her hair done up, makeup perfect as always. She stopped short when she saw me sitting there, clearly surprised to find me at the kitchen table in the middle of the day rather than watching my shows in the living room. "What's going on, Miss Geraldine?" she asked, her eyes darting to the wall clock. "You feeling okay?" "I'm feeling just fine, Sierra," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Better than I have in months, actually. She moved to the refrigerator, pulling out the orange juice. "That's good. I was about to head out. Got an interview for a receptionist position at that new salon in Buckhead." Another lie. I'd called every salon in Buckhead yesterday. None were hiring. "Before you go," I said calmly, "there's something we need to discuss." She poured her juice, not looking at me. "Can it wait? I don't want to be late." "No, it can't wait. And you won't be late because there is no interview." That got her attention. She turned, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together. "Excuse me?" "I know about the money, Sierra, the withdrawals from my account, the forged signatures." I slid the bank slip across the table. "This is just one of many." Her face changed then, just for a second, a flicker of panic before the mask of indignation settled in. "I don't know what you're talking about. That's crazy. I also know about you going through my mail, redirecting my Social Security checks, taking cash from my purse." I kept my voice level, my hands folded on the table. "And I know what you did to my soup last Wednesday." Her eyes widened just enough to tell me she remembered exactly what she'd done. "What are you even—" "I saw you," I said, cutting her off. "In the reflection of my china cabinet glass. I saw you spit in my food before serving it to me." Sierra's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, calculation, and finally, a cold smile. "And who's going to believe you? The confused old woman who forgets where she puts things? Who can't remember if she's taken her medication? Who needs her son to take care of her?" "That's where you're wrong," I said. "I've been documenting everything. The bank has records of the forged signatures. Ms. Denise saw you going through my mail. And as for being confused," I pulled out another piece of paper from my pocket, the results of a cognitive assessment I'd had done at my doctor's office yesterday. According to Dr. Williams, my cognitive function is excellent for my age group. No signs of dementia or memory issues whatsoever. For the first time since I'd known her, Sierra looked genuinely rattled. She set her juice down with a thump, some of it sloshing over the side. "So what? Robert will never believe you over me. Never." I stood up then, smoothing my dress as I rose. "You might be right about that. My son has been blind when it comes to you, but it doesn't matter what Robert believes anymore." I walked past her to the front door and gestured to the suitcases I'd placed there. "Your things are packed. I want you out of my house within the hour." Sierra laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You can't kick me out. This is Robert's home too." "This is my home," I corrected her. "My name is on the deed. I paid off the mortgage 15 years ago. Robert is welcome to stay. In fact, I hope he does. But you, Sierra, are no longer welcome here." "You can't do this," she said, her voice rising. "You can't just throw me out." "I can, and I am." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is a formal eviction notice. Ms. Denise notarized it yesterday. You have 1 hour to leave voluntarily, or I'll call the police and report the theft and forgery." Your choice. Sierra's face contorted with rage. You vindictive old witch. You think you can just— I think I can protect myself and my home from someone who has stolen from me, disrespected me, and deliberately contaminated my food, I said, my voice still calm, but with an edge of steel now. Which, by the way, is considered assault in the state of Georgia. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing to slits. Robert won't stand for this. He'll choose me. That's his choice to make, I said. And if he does, I'll wish him well. But you and I both know he's not happy. He's just afraid to start over. Sierra stalked past me to the front door, grabbed one of her suitcases, and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a thud, leaving a dent in the drywall. You'll regret this, she hissed. I swear to God you'll regret this. I didn't flinch, didn't raise my voice, just looked her in the eye and said, No, I don't believe I will. The front door slammed open then, and Robert stood in the doorway, his face flushed, eyes darting between me and Sierra. What the hell is going on? I could hear you yelling from the driveway. Sierra rushed to him, tears suddenly streaming down her face, her voice transformed into a wounded sob. Oh, baby, your mother's lost her mind. She's trying to throw me out for no reason. Robert looked at me, confusion and hurt in his eyes. Mama, what is this? I handed him the bank withdrawal slip and the documented evidence of Sierra's theft. She's been stealing from me, Robert, forging my signature, taking money from my purse. That's a lie, Sierra cried. She's making it all up because she's jealous of us. Robert looked at the paper in his hand, his brow furrowed. This looks like your signature, Mama. It's a forgery, I said. The bank confirmed it. She's confused, Sierra insisted, clutching Robert's arm. You know how she gets, forgetting things, making up stories. I looked my son straight in the eye. Robert, I saw her spit in my food. A heavy silence fell over the room. Robert's eyes widened, and he turned slowly to look at Sierra. What? She's lying, Sierra shouted, but there was a new edge of desperation in her voice. Last Wednesday, I continued, she made me soup, and I watched her spit in it before she served it to me. I saw it in the reflection of my china cabinet. Robert's face went pale. He looked at Sierra, and something in her expression must have given her away, because he took a step back from her. Sierra? Tell me that's not true. She tried to recover, forcing a laugh. Of course it's not true. That's disgusting. Why would I do something like that? Because you're cruel, I said simply, and because you don't respect me. Never have. Robert looked between us, conflict written all over his face. I could see him struggling, wanting to believe his wife, but seeing the truth in front of him. I want her out of my house, I said firmly. You can stay, Robert. You're my son, and I love you. But she can't stay here anymore. You have to choose, Sierra said, her voice hard now. Her or me, right now. The silence in my living room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Robert stood there, frozen between Sierra and me, looking from one to the other like a man caught in a trap of his own making. Robert, I said gently, I know this is hard. She's your wife. But I can't have someone in my home who doesn't respect me, who steals from me, who— I couldn't even bring myself to say it again. The idea of someone spitting in my food was still so disgusting, so deeply disrespectful that it made my stomach turn. Sierra was still clutching his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his skin. Baby, you know your mother's always been jealous of us. She can't stand to see you happy. She's making all this up. Robert gently removed her hand from his arm and took a step back, creating distance between them. I could see the conflict in his eyes, but there was something else there too. A dawning realization, perhaps even a relief, like he'd been waiting for permission to see what had been right in front of him all along. Sierra, he said quietly, did you spit in my mother's food? What? No, of course not, she exclaimed, but her voice was too high, too frantic. How could you even ask me that? Because I know my mother, he said, And in all my life, I've never known her to lie. Not once. Sierra's face changed then. The mask of wounded innocence dropped away, replaced by something harder, colder. So, that's it? You're choosing her over me? Your pathetic, controlling mother over your own wife? This isn't about choosing sides, Robert said, his voice finding strength I hadn't heard in months. This is about right and wrong, about respect. Respect? Sierra laughed bitterly. What about respecting me? We've been stuck in this dump for months while she watches our every move, judging us, making us feel like charity cases. This dump is my home, I said calmly, and you've been living in it rent-free, eating food I paid for, using utilities I cover, all while stealing from me behind my back. Sierra's face flushed red. She turned to Robert, desperate now. Are you really going to let her talk to me like this? After everything we've been through together? Robert looked tired suddenly, older than his years. Sierra, please, just tell me the truth. Did you take money from my mother's accounts? She hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. That tiny pause told us everything we needed to know. We needed it, she finally blurted out. Your job interviews weren't going anywhere. We had bills to pay, credit cards maxed out. What was I supposed to do? She has plenty, sitting on this house, her pension, her savings, while we had nothing. Robert's shoulders slumped. So it's true, all of it. Oh, don't act so shocked, Sierra spat. You knew something was up. You just didn't want to ask questions. It was easier to pretend everything was fine, wasn't it? To let me handle the dirty work while you played video games at Marcus's place. The look on Robert's face made my heart ache. The betrayal, the humiliation, the shame, all washing over him at once. I want you to leave, he said quietly. Both of us. We'll find somewhere else to go. That wasn't what I expected. My breath caught in my throat. Robert, no. You don't have to leave. This is your home too. No, Mama, he said, shaking his head. I can't stay here after what she did to you. I need some time to figure things out. Sierra's eyes lit up. See? He's choosing me after all. I'm not choosing anyone, Robert said firmly. I'm going to stay with Marcus for a while, alone. The triumph on Sierra's face crumbled. What? You can't be serious. I am, he said. I think we need some time apart. I need to think about everything. Sierra's face contorted with rage. She grabbed the nearest thing, a framed photo of my late husband, and hurled it against the wall. The glass shattered, scattering across the hardwood floor. You weak, pathetic mama's boy, she screamed. You think you can survive without me? You're nothing, nothing. Robert didn't flinch. He just looked at her with a sadness that seemed to come from deep inside. I think you've just proven my mother's point, he said quietly. Sierra stormed to the front door, grabbed one of her suitcases, and flung it open. She looked back at us, her eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over. Either of you. You'll regret this. The door slammed behind her with such force that the windows rattled. The sudden silence felt like a physical presence in the room. Robert and I stood there, neither of us knowing quite what to say. My son, my baby boy, now a middle-aged man with graying temples, looked lost. I wanted to go to him, to hold him like I did when he was small and had fallen off his bike or been teased at school. But this wasn't a hurt that a mother's embrace could heal. I'm so sorry, Mama, he finally said, his voice breaking. I should have seen it. Should have known. It's not your fault, I told him, though part of me wanted to shake him and ask how he could have been so blind. But I knew the answer. Love, or what we mistake for love, can blind us to the most obvious truths. I'll pay you back, he said. Every penny she took, I promise. I nodded, though money was the least of my concerns right now. Where will you go? Marcus said I could crash on his couch for a while, just until I figure things out. He ran a hand through his hair, looking around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. I can't believe she did that. spitting in your food. Who does something like that? Someone who has no respect, I said simply. For me, for you, for herself. Robert nodded slowly. I need to get some things. Then I'll go. He paused, looking uncertain. Is that okay? If I take some time? Of course it is, I said. This is still your home, Robert. It always will be. But I understand if you need space right now. He disappeared into the bedroom, and I heard drawers opening and closing. I sat down on the sofa, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had drained me in a way I hadn't expected. I'd stood up for myself, reclaimed my power, and yet there was no triumph in it, only a hollow sadness. When Robert emerged with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he looked like a younger version of himself, the boy who'd left for college, eager and scared all at once. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He paused at the door. Mama, you did the right thing, standing up for yourself. I'm proud of you for that. And then he was gone, too, leaving me alone in my house for the first time in months. The silence was deafening. I looked around at the home I'd fought to protect, the familiar walls, the photographs, the furniture Harold and I had chosen together decades ago. It was mine again. No more walking on eggshells, no more missing money, no more disrespect. But as I bent down to pick up the broken pieces of Harold's picture frame, I couldn't help wondering about the cost. My son was gone. His marriage, troubled as it was, possibly over. And I was alone again. Outside, the streetlights were coming on. Through the window, I could see Evelyn on her porch, watching my house with concern. Mrs. Patterson was walking her dog, slowing as she passed by, no doubt wondering about the commotion earlier. Tomorrow, the neighborhood would be buzzing with what had happened at Miss Geraldine's house. But tonight, I just needed to be still, to breathe, to remember that sometimes standing up for yourself means being alone for a while, but at least you can look yourself in the mirror with dignity. I carefully removed Harold's photograph from the broken frame, wiped away the glass shards, and placed it on the mantel. Well, I whispered to his smiling face, that didn't quite go how I expected, but I think you would have approved. And somewhere deep inside, I felt something like peace begin to settle over me. The morning after Sierra and Robert left, I woke up to a silence that felt almost foreign. For months, I'd been living with the constant tension of Sierra's presence, the sound of her footsteps, her voice on the phone, the way she'd slam cabinet doors in the kitchen. Now there was just peace. I lay in bed for a few extra minutes, listening to the neighborhood coming to life. Birds singing outside my window, Mr. Patterson's dog barking at the mail truck, the familiar creak of Evelyn's screen door as she stepped out to get her newspaper. I made my way to the kitchen and brewed a pot of coffee. My kitchen looked different somehow, cleaner, more orderly. I realized it was because Sierra's expensive coffee maker was gone from the counter. Her protein shakes and diet foods no longer cluttered my refrigerator. The space felt like mine again. Around 10, the phone rang. It was Michael, my oldest. Mama, just checking in. How are you doing? I'm fine, baby. Really? Robert called me last night, he said, his voice careful. Told me what happened. I sighed, sitting down at the kitchen table. And what exactly did he say? That Sierra had been stealing from you, that she'd... He paused, his voice tightening. That she'd done something disgusting with your food, and that you asked her to leave. That's the short version, yes. Mama, why didn't you tell us this was going on? James and I would have come down there right away. This was something I needed to handle myself, Michael. I'm not some helpless old woman who needs her sons to fight her battles. Nobody said you were, but we're family. We're supposed to help each other. We talked a while longer, with Michael offering to come visit the following weekend. I told him I'd be happy to see him, but made it clear I didn't need rescuing. After hanging up, I sat for a while, thinking about family. About how the people who are supposed to love you the most can sometimes be the ones who hurt you the deepest. about how blood ties don't guarantee loyalty or respect. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't help feeling a pang of worry for Robert. Whatever Sierra had done to me, he was the one who'd have to face the aftermath of a broken marriage. The doorbell rang around noon. It was Evelyn, bearing a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. "Thought you might not feel like cooking today," she said, stepping inside. "You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't have to. I wanted to." She set the dish on the counter and turned to face me. "So? How are you, really?" We settled in the living room, where I told her everything that had happened after she'd seen Sierra storming out. "He didn't choose her then," Evelyn said, nodding with satisfaction. "I'm glad. That boy may be confused, but he knows right from wrong. Harold raised him better than that." "He didn't exactly choose me either," I reminded her. "He left too. He needs time to sort himself out. Can you blame him? Finding out your wife is a thief and worse, that's a lot to process." I nodded, understanding. "I just hope he doesn't go back to her." "Would you forgive him if he did?" I thought about it, my hands smoothing the fabric of my dress. "He's my son. I'll always love him. But forgiveness, that might take some time." Over the next week, a new rhythm established itself in my home. I started attending the senior aerobics class at the community center again, something I'd stopped doing when Sierra and Robert moved in because Sierra had made comments about old people exercising. I rejoined my church's Bible study on Wednesday nights. I invited friends over for coffee without worrying about Sierra's judgmental stares or sighs. It was like I'd been holding my breath for 3 months, and now I could finally exhale. Robert called a few times, brief, awkward conversations where neither of us quite knew what to say. He was still at Marcus's place. Sierra had moved in with a friend, he told me, and they were taking some time apart to figure things out. I didn't press him for details. Some things a mother doesn't need to hear about her son's marriage. On Friday of that first week, Ms. Denise stopped by with my mail. "Thought I'd hand-deliver this one," she said, holding out a thick envelope. "It's from Social Security. Figured you'd want it right away." I thanked her, offering her a glass of sweet tea, which she accepted. We sat on the porch, watching the neighborhood kids riding bikes up and down the street. "Word gets around," she said carefully, "about what happened with Sierra." I nodded. In a neighborhood like ours, there are no real secrets. I'm sure people are talking. They are, but not how you might think. Ms. Denise leaned forward. "Mrs. Patterson told me she always thought something wasn't right with that girl. Too perfect on the outside, you know? And Walter, Mr. Patterson, he saw her coming home late some nights with a man who wasn't Robert." This was news to me, but I wasn't entirely surprised. Did Robert know? Don't think so. Walter didn't want to be the one to tell him. Said it wasn't his business. She sipped her tea. "But Geraldine, folks are proud of you. Standing up for yourself like that. Not everyone would have the courage." I hadn't thought of it as courage, just necessity. But hearing her say it made me sit a little straighter. The second week brought more changes. I went to the bank and set up new accounts with additional security measures. I changed the locks on my house, not because I was afraid of Robert coming back, but because I didn't want Sierra to have any way to get in. Mr. Jenkins at the bank helped me set up a credit monitoring service to make sure no new accounts were opened in my name. I also started volunteering at the community garden near the church. There was something healing about getting my hands in the dirt, planting things that would grow and bloom. Mrs. Wilson, who ran the garden, put me in charge of the tomato plants, saying I had a knack for them. I'd come home with soil under my fingernails and a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. On Wednesday of the third week, Robert showed up on my doorstep. He looked thinner, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. But there was something different about him, too. A straightness to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Can I come in, Mama?" he asked, standing awkwardly on the porch. I stepped aside, letting him enter the house he'd grown up in, the house he'd left 3 weeks ago. We sat in the living room, the space between us filled with unspoken words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he finally said. "About Sierra, about me, about how I let things get so out of control." I stayed silent, letting him talk. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She was never who I thought she was. I see that now. I was just so caught up in how she made me feel, like I was special, important. But it wasn't real. None of it was real." "I'm sorry, baby," I said softly. "No." He shook his head firmly. "Don't apologize. You have nothing to be sorry for. I'm the one who should be apologizing. I brought her into your home. I defended her when she was mistreating you. I chose not to see what was happening right in front of me." The pain in his voice broke my heart. However angry I'd been at him, he was still my son, still my baby boy, no matter how old he got. "We filed for divorce," he said. "I'm staying with Marcus until I can find my own place. Got a job interview next week at the auto parts store on Cascade Road." "That's good, Robert. That's real good." He hesitated, then asked the question I could see had been on his mind. "Would it be okay if I came by sometimes? Just to check on you, maybe have dinner now and then?" "This is still your home," I told him. "It always will be. But we both need some time to heal, to find our way back to who we were before all this." He nodded, understanding. "Thank you, Mama, for everything, for showing me what real strength looks like." When he left, I stood on the porch watching him walk to his car, remembering the little boy he'd once been, remembering the man I knew he could still become. The neighborhood settled into its normal rhythms as spring gave way to summer. The children were out of school, filling the streets with their laughter and games. The heat wave that settled over Atlanta had everyone moving a little slower, seeking shade and cold drinks. And me? I found my own rhythm again. Morning coffee on the porch, tending to my garden. Sunday services at church, visits from friends and neighbors, phone calls with my sons. Small pleasures that added up to a life worth living. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd still think about Sierra. Wonder where she was, what she was doing. Not with anger or bitterness, but with a kind of detached curiosity. She had been a storm that passed through my life, destructive, yes, but ultimately temporary. While the damage she'd done was real, it had also revealed strengths in me I'd forgotten I possessed. In standing up to her, I'd reclaimed not just my home, but something more valuable, my sense of self, my dignity, my power. These were things no one could take from me, not as long as I was willing to defend them. A year has passed since that afternoon when I set Sierra's suitcases by the door. A year of changes, growth, and healing, not just for me, but for my whole family. The house is quiet now, but it's a different kind of quiet from the one that haunted me after Harold passed. This is a silence I've chosen, filled with small joys I've relearned to value. The birds singing in the morning, the clink of a spoon against my coffee cup as I sit on the porch, the creak of that loose floorboard in the hallway that Harold always promised to fix. Robert and I have found a new way to relate to each other. He hasn't moved back in, and I think that's been good for both of us. He rents a small apartment near his job at the auto parts store, where he was promoted to assistant manager 3 months ago. He comes over for Sunday dinners, sometimes bringing a dessert he picked up from the bakery. We don't talk much about Sierra, but I know the divorce was finalized 2 months ago. He seems lighter now, as if he's left a burden behind. Michael and James, my other sons, have started calling more frequently. It's funny how sometimes we need a storm to remind us of what's important. Michael even brought his children to spend a week with me during summer vacation. Seeing my grandchildren running through the same yard where their fathers played decades ago. Well, there's no greater gift for a grandmother. As for Sierra, I heard she moved to another city. Robert doesn't mention her name, and I respect that. I've learned that some people enter our lives not to stay, but to teach us something important. Sierra, with all the harm she caused, taught me to value my own strength. She showed me that even at 73, I still have the courage to stand up for myself, to set boundaries, to choose dignity over complacency. The neighborhood has changed too, not the place itself, but how I relate to it. People treat me differently now, with a kind of respect that goes beyond age. Mrs. Patterson invited me to join the neighborhood community council. Walter spends more time on my porch, drinking tea and talking about the old days. Even the children on the street seem to see me with different eyes, as if that little old lady has transformed into someone interesting. In the community garden, my plants flourish. I have tomatoes, bell peppers, and herbs that I share with my neighbors. My hands still ache with arthritis, but there's a pleasure in feeling the damp soil between my fingers that no pain can diminish. "You look younger, Geraldine," Evelyn told me the other day as we watered our plants. "There's a sparkle in your eyes I haven't seen in years." Maybe she's right. I don't feel younger. I still have the same bones that ache when rain is coming, the same eyes that need glasses to read the newspaper. But I feel more myself, as if all that trouble with Sierra scraped away a layer of doubt and fear that had been building up since Harold died, revealing the strong woman who was always underneath. A few weeks ago, I found a box of old photographs in the closet. I spent the whole afternoon looking at images from the past. Harold and me when we were young, the boys as children, our first house. There was one photo in particular that caught my attention. Me at 30, with baby Michael in my arms, looking directly at the camera with a defiant gaze. At the time, we were facing difficulties. Harold had lost his job, money was tight, the future uncertain. But in that photo, my chin was raised, my eyes determined. I kept that photo on my bedside table. It reminds me that the strength I showed with Sierra didn't come from nowhere. It was always there, waiting to be rediscovered. People often think that when we get old, we become weak, dependent, easy to manipulate. They think we no longer have a voice, that we should be content with any crumbs of attention or affection, that we should be grateful when someone sacrifices to keep us around, even when that someone treats us with disrespect. But age doesn't diminish our value. It doesn't erase our dignity. It doesn't make us less deserving of respect. Sometimes, life waits until our hair has turned gray to teach us the most important lessons. In my case, I learned that it's never too late to set boundaries, to say no, to choose ourselves, even when it means being alone for a while. Yesterday, Robert asked if I felt lonely in this big house. I smiled and told him there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone is a circumstance. Being lonely is a state of mind. And me? Well, I'm alone when I want to be, accompanied when I desire company, and at peace with myself all the time. I don't know how much longer the good Lord will keep me on this earth, but I know that whatever time I have left, I'll live with the certainty that my house is my kingdom, that my decisions have value, that my voice deserves to be heard. Because sometimes, strength looks like silence until the moment we finally speak. And when we do speak, well, we make sure they never forget it, and that's my story. Now I want to know, where are you all listening from? Comment below and let me know what city you're from. Sending you all a big hug.